Mark van Oorschoten. I've known René since my studies in Utrecht University, so I think it's well over 30 years. By now, I work at PBL. PBL stands for Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency, which doesn't make sense, of course, but PBL in Dutch is Planbureau voor de Leefomgeving. PBL. So we are part of government, but we are also allowed to criticize our own government, which is a very unique position, I think. We're independent, so to say. We are a broker between scientific knowledge and policy. We do not advise the ministries to accept or pursue a certain policy. We just present the knowledge out there, scientific knowledge, which should be included in decision making. That's our role. So we do strategic policy analysis. Some memories. It started with Utrecht University for me. Of course, some of my memories are not real. They're borrowed from my wife, who was living with René in Mambura Hill in Guyana. So I looked into an old pack of slides that she still had, but I don't have a slide scanner. So you're very lucky, René. I also know René from Bossenoverleg, the stakeholder meeting organized by the ICN Netherlands. And from that moment on, we've cooperated with Tropenbos on several subjects, especially a booklet on the benefits, biodiversity benefits of sustainable forest management, which is a very fruitful publication, with Roderick. And they also assisted us with scenario development, which I'm going to talk about. The landscape approach, also a very subject where we meet a lot. So, a picture you will recognize, I think. It's the Kaitur Falls in Guyana. Always hear that they are so lovely. Never seen them, but well. We have developed several scenarios at PBL about how to tackle all kinds of global environmental challenges. I'm not a smallholder specialist, and these scenarios were not meant to accentuate exactly the role of smallholders, but I think I have some messages to share on how we can bridge those scales between things we can see in the bigger picture, a bigger picture, not the bigger picture, because that doesn't exist, of course. We just sketch possible scenarios for future development, and we can discuss how smallholders fit into that. I'm Mark, but this is mostly the work of some colleagues of mine, Marcel Kok, who is now present in Geneva, where the Convention of Biological Diversity is meeting right now. Another colleague, Johan Meijer. This is where these scenarios are meant for. We see this continuous historical decline of biodiversity worldwide, the bottom line, so to say. A lot of conservation efforts have been going into, well, preserving natural areas, so stopping further loss, which could be represented in the yellow line. Just expand the area of protected areas and contain nature within those limits. But you can also think of a positive pathway, so restoring nature and also including nature in our own production and consumption systems. But that's, of course, a very big challenge. But that's the narrative of the nature positive development, which is now under discussion exactly in Geneva, how to attain that. So what we usually do is make all kinds of scenarios. We use global models on land use and try to capture a future development in a sort of narrative, and also we can calculate what's happening. And in an agenda-setting phase of policy, these scenarios are more of an explorative nature. So what if? What would happen if so-and-so? We are now in a phase of policy making, and there we are much more into trying to get solution-oriented scenarios, target seeking, so to say. So we have a certain target, and we try to envision certain pathways to attain that. So this is what this story is about. So this study was called Assessing Nature Conservation Strategies in a Food Secure and 2 Degrees Warmer World. Quite a mouthful, but that means that we are trying to pursue different targets. So both the targets for climate change and biodiversity, and also securing enough food in the world. So the aim is to construct scenarios to do so, and we constructed 2 different pathways for how to do that. One is called Half Earth. It's a traditional, so to say, area-based conservation kind of scenario. agriculture on a path to sustainable intensification, and this is sometimes also referred to as the land sparing hypothesis. So make room for nature. The other one is sharing the planet. There we are much more focusing on the contribution of nature to people. So we have a different value set related to biodiversity and nature. Ecosystem service values are central in that as well. An approach to agriculture, which some call the agro-ecological approach. Land sharing is the common name for this one. So diving a little bit into those a bit more. So Half Earth is the rationale of nature protection. The aim of this scenario is to protect 50% of each eco-region. Right now they're talking in Geneva about the new target, which is 30%. This one goes even beyond that. It comes out of literature and all kinds of discussions on the future of nature. It's not that we just construct these by ourselves. These are all based in ongoing discussions. That 50% exists of existing protected areas nowadays, key biodiversity areas, and zero extinction zones. So we make maps based on all kinds of criteria for ecological value and make up maps where we think nature should be protected. Agriculture is oriented on land sparing, so we have what I said, sustainable intensification based on technological innovations. Eco-efficiency, reducing environmental externalities are central in that. Intensive agriculture is also there. It's just maintained in the areas where it already exists. And smallholders, I think, well, this is not, if you look at the paper, the central thesis, but I think smallholders fit in, of course they fit in. They are there anyway. But they can be part of the solution. But we have to invest in sustainable intensification to take them on board. For closing the yield gap in agriculture productivity. The other one, sharing the planet, the rationale is connecting people to nature in landscapes where all these different values of nature are seen and captured. The conservation strategy partly overlaps with the other one. Now we take protected areas, key biodiversity areas, but we also add forests as they contain a lot of carbon, which is a good thing, of course, for climate change mitigation and peatlands. And also things like riparian zones along rivers are now protected. So there's a different shift in your conservation priorities. Agroecology is part of that, and land sharing. We take on board those elements of that ecosystems and healthy soils can provide. Intensive agriculture might have to transform to less intensive practices here. So smallholders are here more at the center of the solution. They are part of those multifunctional landscapes. They shape local production systems and appreciate local values. So this is okay. On top of those conservation strategies, we also have to include other types of measures for meeting the other targets for climate change and food security, which is reducing meat and dairy production. We need this protein transition if we want to achieve all of those targets. Now you can devise scenarios where one target is reached, and then we continue consuming as we do. But if you want to achieve all of them, more has to change. So also our consumption patterns have to change. Agricultural systems will have to change. We should not rely on enormous amount of biofuels, large areas that are taken up by those kind of crops, radish in it, and there's many, many more options in these scenarios. I will not be able to talk about that. So we use a model, and we use indicators. We use a global an image model, which is mostly based on global land use, because that's at the heart of the solution. The biodiversity indicators also, as said, we have developed our own naturalness indicator called MSA, which means that a purely unaffected system gets the index 1, and a completely changed forest or grassland system gets a very low value. It's a very simple indicator, but we also can model other ones like Living Planet Index, etc., etc. So this is the stuff, well, I won't bother you with that. So bending the curve, is it possible? Well, I have 3 graphs here. From left to right, it's biodiversity, climate change, and food security. The gray low line in the first is the business as usual scenario, where biodiversity is lost. If you apply only the conservation strategies, we have those dotted lines. But if you include all these packages of all measures that I just sketched, we can attain much more. So the red, pinkish color is half Earth scenario, which shows the best results in terms of the MSA. But also the blue line performs quite well. After 2050, we see a further decline because populations will continue to grow. So in the end, we need more land again. If you look at climate change, we see more or less the same thing. Now in a business usual scenario, in this one, the gray line, the top line in this, we see high temperature changes. With conservation only, you can achieve a little reduction, but it only makes sense when we include all the measures. So the low lines, both blue and pink, they are overlapping, so you don't see them that well. And then food security, which was a bit of a surprise to us, that had a large effect because, well, especially in the half-Earth scenario, so much land is now taken from nature that there's not much that much left on for agricultural expansion. So that limits the amount of land we can use for future population growth and feeding the future population. It only makes sense if you then also shift your consumption pattern to less meat-intensive and animal protein-intensive stuff. Then now those effects on food security and food prices can be diminished. So in essence, we need all of these measures at the same time to make a real change. The same is expressed by this one. Because of the time, I won't go too much into this. Let's see how far I am with time. Okay. But the same thing here. It only makes sense when you include all of those measures. Most of the perceived hunger is in regions like Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. Okay, so this is a map of our conservation strategies and how that turns out for biodiversity protection. So you see different patterns. The green ones, those are the improved areas in both scenarios because they partly overlap these solution-oriented scenarios. The yellow one are the ones mostly improved under the high half-Earth scenario, so focusing on already existing natural systems, while as the sharing the planet scenario, the pink one, has a different focus on already yet and nowadays productive areas. So they have a different focus and different spatial consequence. So a few conclusions from those scenario exercises. Well, we think by 2050 it is possible to achieve the targets, all of these conventions, and also for food-related goals, serving the SDGs. However, this is extremely ambitious. It requires transitions in all different sectors of society, so both in how we produce and consume energy, food and materials. So a broad portfolio of measures is needed to tackle those problems. Climate change and biodiversity should be targeted together. So have measures that serve both, if possible. Okay, we need to expand current protected areas to at least also serve the targets of CBD convention, and land use changes are central. So changes in food consumption, that's something we really are focusing on in a lot of our scenarios. So now I come to a bit where usually now our story stops. So what does this mean on the ground? These are bigger pictures covering the whole world until 2050, 2070, which is quite, of course, ambitious to do. But what does it mean if you go back to where people are living and to their own environment? Well, we put a few ideas where we think smallholders are fitting in with these scenarios. So implications for smallholders in half-Earth, they should be part of some kind of agricultural intensification program that is partly investment-driven. Efficient production is a key, so closing the yield gap and getting to high productivity is essential. At the same time, you don't want that productivity increase to have negative effects on environmental systems. So these farmers should be linked to global markets, I think. The question is, of course, how large is a viable farm in this scenario? So what is the viability of small-scale agriculture? I won't be able to answer that question, but of course this is where I'm stopping and other speakers will take over. In the Sharing the Planet, we have a different view. Agro-Ecological pathways are central. This is more development-driven. using what nature can provide to people. Nature-based solutions are central, so having good organic soils, relying less on inputs, but still some inputs will be there. We're also trying to have local benefits to be of value for farmers. Those farms might be the ones who would mostly serve regional demands and maybe not be so much linked to world markets. So is it possible in this scenario, and it is a caricature what it really is, to capture enough revenue and enough values for farmer families to have a decent life and sufficient living wages? That's a question as well. What I always like to address, and this is some material of my colleague Johan Meijer, who's a landscape approach specialist. So these scenarios are just general archetypes and nothing more. This is not a prediction. It is just showing on a system level what should change to attain all kinds of targets. But there's no one-size-fits-all solution, of course. We need a whole-of-society approach where all actors in society will contribute to solving the problems. And all those actors will have to find their own niche in this whole thing. So doing the right thing in the right place is, of course, central. And the different roles that smallholders can play, well, we can see them everywhere throughout the whole landscape. So different actors, but also different types of smallholders will have complementary roles at the landscape level. So this is what this figure is about with upstream. We see more natural and hilly areas where we think places for smallholder agriculture could be found, and small, maybe community-based forestry. When you go to the middle area, there I think is a good spot for agricultural innovation and agroforestry. And if you come to the low-lying areas, we see industrial crops, tree plantings, and recreation and amenities. So this is where I will stop. This is a sketching the overall picture and going a little bit further down. And this is, okay, I think, the point where others will pick up. Just a few last remarks. Well, we cooperated in the past already a lot with TBI. I think it's very valuable for ground truthing our ideas and thoughts about those general archetypical scenarios. Now, is it really feasible and possible to do it in such a way? Now, are the parameters that we use in our models, are those the right ones? So we need to have all kinds of insights and knowledge about sustainable forestry and sustainable agricultural systems. And what are those local benefits of nature-based solution? Is this just a general idea, or does it really work in practice? And is there enough investment available to help those smallholder farmers to make this step to a new agricultural system and stay in place in some way or other? So we need all that knowledge to, well, check our material and see how we can, in the end, when you want to implement all kinds of changes, whether we have the right tools and the governance ideas of making this work. So these are a few of the report stuff that we produce together or where we meet regularly. So this is where I will stop. And of course, well, I was able to at least save one slide of the Mabura Hill period that Doreen always talked to me about this wonderful steel band that was hired at different parties of Tropenbos. So I was just hoping that later today in the lobby, but well, maybe that's too far-fetched. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very